Hey everyone, my name is Justin Kim, and you're on Inverse. And in the studio, you got Jonathan, Felicia, and Israel. Hey guys. And we have you guys out there as well. And we just really, I think what binds our team together is we really like Bible study and not just reading the Bible or not just pontificating on scripture, but really looking at practical elements and then sharing where we see humor, where we see things that really kind of don't match, and finding how it matches throughout all of scripture and applying it to our lives. And we're so glad that you guys are here, whether it's podcast or audio or radio or smoke signal, however you're getting this signal, we really appreciate and we look forward to your comments and suggestions. Please no insults, but really communicating with you on social media. We're studying the book of Joshua, and you can go to inversebible.org and look at all the Bible study guides, especially in this quarter. We're looking at Joshua. Last week, we looked at the Abrahamic covenant, the promise. I think Foundation. Felicia and Jonathan, or Israel, you were. Jonathan, you were not. You were fishing in Austria, wherever you were. And we looked at the foundation of this 400-year prophecy. Yeah, you're familiar with this?
I think I've heard of it.
Okay, you've heard of it, right? and then although we're studying the book of Joshua, we're not going to get into Joshua just yet, because we're going to look at the character of Joshua. And then instead of going to Genesis, we're going to now go to Exodus. So we'll have a word of prayer from Felicia, and then Jonathan, if you can read some scripture for us.
Sure thing. Father, we are so grateful that to whatever role you call us to, there is something in the Bible, someone in the Bible that we can relate to. And when it comes to leadership, we can look to the story of Moses and Joshua and their struggle through this, but most importantly, how you helped them by your Spirit. So as we study the story, as we study the life of Joshua, may we take it and apply it to our own lives and be drawn closer to Jesus. In your name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Let's go to Exodus chapter 17 and then 8 and onwards. And John, can you read that for us?
Now Amalek came and fought with Israel in Rephidim. And Moses said to Joshua, "Choose us some men and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand." So Joshua did as Moses said to him and fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And so it was when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands became heavy, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on one side and the other on the other side. And his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. So Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Write this for a memorial in the book and recount it in the hearing of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven." And Moses built an altar and called its name, "The Lord is my banner." For he said, "Because the Lord has sworn, the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation."
Thank you. Israel, how's it going?
Good.
Hey, can you give us just a really quick recap of last episode? Because I think that feeds into what we're doing here.
Yeah, so we were talking about how the story of Joshua actually begins with the story of Abraham.
Yeah.
And it's based on a promise that God gave to Abraham that he would bless him, that he would multiply his seed, even though he had no children up to that point, and that through him and through his seed or through his family, all the nations of the earth would be blessed. God promised that although Abraham would die in his old age a peaceful death, that his generation, his offspring, would ultimately be living in the land of strangers, and they would undergo difficulties for 400 years. And then after that prophecy was completed, then they would be able to defeat their enemies.
Yeah, in that 400-year prophecy, I think it'd be cool if you're like alive in the beginning of it, because you're like listening to it, and you get to be. It's cool if you're part of the end of it, because you're getting to see. But poor those guys who are in the middle, who are like, we don't know when it was made, and we're like in the year 200 to year 300, and we're like, oh man, we're just here in Egypt, and then they die. And then I'm sure the Lord has something special just for them, the middle guys. It's like the middle children. You're a middle child, aren't you?
Yeah,
I'm also a middle child.
You're a middle child, yeah. God has something special for you guys. But for the lastborn, you're a lastborn, Israel, has something special for those. I'm mentioning this because we're going to look at the character of Joshua. I love the character of Joshua because I just feel like he's, we'll look at it, but in many ways he was prepared but also unprepared, and now he's receiving the mantle, and that shifting of the guard from Moses to Joshua. As I was with Moses, so shall I be with you. It's just a wonderful promise that in every stage of my life, in every little thing, I'm just like, oh man, can I handle this? I always go back to Joshua 1 verses 1 through 1 through 8, 1 through 9, and then how I just feel unprepared. And I'm sure Joshua, even after years of experience, like he still feels unprepared following the footsteps of Moses.
What I think is beautiful is, because you mentioned the 400 years, and I don't know if this was mentioned in the previous episode, but even though we see, when we look at the story of Israel, we see that, there were issues. They had to kind of relearn some of the ways of God.
Yeah.
But I believe that throughout, and we have seen this all throughout history, God has always had people, families that have been faithful and have kept truth alive, have passed it on by generation and generation. And Joshua seems to come from a line of family that maybe was faithful all the way through those 400 years. And so he was prepared to be faithful and become a leader, a young leader, within Israel. As we know, he was one of the few that actually saw the promised land from those who came out of Egypt. So it's I think that speaks to God's grace. It speaks to parenting. It speaks to so many things. You may not see what in 3, 4, 5, 10 generations from now will happen, but your faithfulness today does impact generations. Even if there's an unfaithful generation after you, maybe the generation after will see what you as their grandfather, great-grandfather did, and what stood out, how God used you. Your testimony can inspire even long after you're gone. And so who knows what the faithfulness of those who were in between did, how it consciously or subconsciously impacted the life of Joshua and others who left Egypt.
It's those in-betweeners that really kept the promise alive, right? Hey, don't forget.
They passed the baton along.
Yeah, there you go. And I wonder if Caleb was, or not Caleb, but Caleb and Joshua, both of them, when they're one of the 2 of the 12 spies, they were like, hey man, like time's up. Like now it's time to go back. And maybe that's where come to the basis of their courage. It's not mentioned in scripture, but you gotta kind of have to imagine like the timing is coming to an end. They're like, hey, like it's not based on our ability, but it's based on the time promise, the promise of God. I want to go back to the text here, because here in Exodus 17, it gives us one little episode, one little glimpse of how Joshua was being prepared. Can I say that?
Yeah.
And the relationship between Moses and Joshua. Let's start with there. What is the relationship between what Moses is doing and what Joshua is doing? Describe that relationship. And it's not really clear about the relationship, but there is something there.
For sure.
Yeah, Felicia?
One thing that I noticed in this story is you would think that Joshua is the one doing the hard work because he's fighting. Like he has the sword, he's going out to battle, and Moses tells him, choose us some men and go out and fight.
Yeah.
I'm going to stand on the top of the hill and watch the battle.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? So you would think, oh, Joshua is in the thick of it, and then Moses is just standing up and looking down. But Moses plays such a critical role because he's praying and interceding for the people. And as long as he has his hands up and calling on the Lord and praying, they are prevailing. So one thing that I notice in this relationship between Moses and Joshua is something that needs to be replicated with leaders in the church and followers in the church, that there's always someone when they are praying for you and interceding and you have your hand in the trenches, you're doing the work, make sure that you have a Moses on the top of the hill, watching over you, guiding you, telling you what you need to do, and don't think that you are so self-sufficient and don't need someone holding up their hands for you. How many of us can attest to it was the praying mom, it was someone in the church who was praying for us, who was encouraging us. They kept us going. So that's one critical thing that I noticed in this relationship between Moses and Joshua. They both need each other. They're both playing different roles.
Israel?
There are certain words that popped out to me as we were reading that I think demonstrate the kind of leader that Joshua was. The first one is found, let me see, in verse, where's the one where it says choose?
9.
Verse 9.
All right, verse 9. All right, so it says, Moses said to Joshua, choose some men and go out and fight. So the first word that kind of popped out to me was the word choose. So he was
choose us. Some men.
Yeah, choose us some men. So he was entrusted with the responsibility to choose people to fight. And I think that is a testament to the kind of person that he was. Moses he was dependable enough for Moses to say to him, I'm entrusting you with the ability to choose people that are able to deal with this task. Yeah. So he was a person who was competent, who was smart, who had the ability to make good decisions.
I only emphasize us because I know it's just another word, but I mean it's like hey, choose for us.
Yeah,
like he doesn't have to trust that, like, not choose for yourself, not choose for me, but whoever you choose, it's on behalf of both of us. It's kind of a cool trust element.
Yeah. It strengthens. It adds to.
Yep.
Yeah. So choose us some men, and then the second word is fight. You know, so he was not only entrusted to choose people to represent the children of Israel as their representatives, but also for the task of fighting. So he was a person who was called on to be the fighter, and that it shows that he's you need Moses definitely holding up his hands, but you also need a person who's going to fight to be fearless, right? And so he was, to me, the word that kind of comes out to me is he was a fearless person. He was not afraid to do the seemingly difficult task that most people would be most people would be afraid to do. Then Moses says, "I will stand on top of the hill and do my part." I think that this speaks to the kind of trust that Joshua has in Moses, because as hard as it is to lift up your hands and hold them up forever, I'd be like, you know what? I would rather have that task, because, people, like, for me, it's like, it's funny because she sees it like he was interceding, the spiritual, like the deep spiritual element. I'm like, the guy's just holding up his hands, right? To me, it shows the kind of trust that Joshua has in Moses, which is, when you think about the trust, when you think about our context, I don't think I would have that kind of trust in my superior. I'd be like, you know what? If you're the holier one, like your God's
come down.
Why don't you go down? I'll hold my hands up.
Right.
So he has trust in his quote unquote superiors. Verse 10. I love verse 10. It says, "So Joshua did as Moses said unto him." You can think of this as like he's obedient, but I think about it as like he's a team player. So Joshua is willing to do what needs to be done for the sake of the team. He obeys the commands that Moses gives to him. And then if you skip down to verse 13, it says, "So Joshua defeated Amalek." And I think he's a person who is successful at what he does, right? And we find a little bit of a hint as to why he is successful. Human effort plus divine power equals success.
Yeah.
So he's fighting the armies with all his might, but he's also relying on God's role in the whole thing. And so because of this, he becomes a successful person regardless of the task before him, because outside of human power or outside of divine power, they would have failed, right?
Yeah.
And so he gives everything that he's got, even though it seems as though the odds are against them. He still gives it all that he's got. And I think that all of these different kind of words give a little bit of an insight as to the kind of leader he was.
That's good.
I think it's I believe this is the first time Joshua's mentioned. Am I right or wrong about that? I'm not 100% sure, but I feel like everything before is just Exodus, coming out of Egypt, plagues, and now this is the first big war.
Yeah, I think so.
And so Joshua must have, to some degree, stood out to Moses. There's 1.5 million people here. So this man, whatever he was doing, his faithfulness must have shown. And so he's chosen to do this. He's a fighter, as Israel just mentioned. But then I find it interesting that in verse 14, God says to Moses, "Write this for memorial in the book and recount it in the hearing of Joshua." So here we already, in the very first instance that we hear about Joshua, you can already see a glimpse of, hey, Joshua needs to hear this. This is because I have a plan for him. Whether Moses already knew that Joshua will take over 40 years later or not, we don't know. But God already knows. And he knows Joshua needs to be aware of this. Joshua needs to come into the closer circle here. He's more than just a fighter. He's also a future leader that I'm preparing. So I think it's just an interesting narrative aspect here that we see that mentioned directly by the Lord.
Yeah, that's good.
I want to go bring your attention to verse 6. Verse 6 is very interesting. The context is here. They found some water, Verse 6, behold, I will stand before you there on the rock of Horeb. You shall strike the rock, water will come out of it, and people may drink. And they're all drinking, yeah. And you would surmise that in a desert culture, that whenever water is found, then the other tribes around will come and try to steal that water from you. Water was very, very, very precious. That word for Horeb, and I guess I'm just trying to point out, there is a height motif in this story. The word Horeb means that the Lord is standing there. Yeah, that the God's presence is there, but God is standing there. And then you see in verse 8, Amalek came and fought with Israel in Rephidim. Rephidim is where the water is happening. So these Amalekites come, and the root word for Amalekites are the giants. So there's these tall people there. So tall people coming in, and there's this height motif, right? So then Moses he tells Joshua to go out, and then he goes in verse 9, tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. So you have these giants coming all around. I'm just imagining on the plains. I don't know if there were plains, but and then Joshua's fighting against these giants. And can you just imagine you're surrounded by these giants and you can't see what's going around, but in the distance there's a hill, and then there's Moses on top of the hill, and then like in the graphics you have Moses as like he's holding his rod like this way, but some Bible scholars say that Moses was lifting his rod that way. Right, like lifting it high up. So I don't know. It doesn't say, but in verse 11, so it was when Moses held up his hand, and then Israel prevailed, and when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. And you can just kind of. I'm using my sanctified imagination, if you will. Like he's fighting the giants here, and like the hands went down. And like, man, I can't see Moses's hands, man. So he's kind of losing the war. But then he sees like the staff goes back up. It's like, oh, he's still up there, and then he just continues to fight. Yeah, and then it kind of ends at where is it? Verse 15. Moses built an altar and called its name, "The Lord is my banner." So, like at the end of this, I don't know if this applies, but this rod is like a little flag. And it's like, hey, it's almost as if like Moses is trying to connect an electrical current with heaven, right? We know that's not true, but he's through prayer, through intercession, through the whatever. He's like, really at the end of it, I'm trying to access God. God's my banner. God's at the top of this. And as long as that we're connected from God to the banner, to the rod, to Moses, to the hill, to Joshua, we're going to win this. And then it's a visual encouragement for Joshua in the midst of the giants. And I'm just thinking like, hey man, we're living in the midst of giants. And who's our Moses who's interceding on our behalf? And by faith, we see Jesus interceding with the Lord Father. And as long as we see Jesus interceding on our behalf, we can defeat these giants in our lives. Amen. Yeah?
Wow.
I want to ask you guys, like, have there been, in your guys' personal experiences, you guys as Joshua's, have there been like mundane things that you were doing that prepared you to come to be on the inverse Bible study show? this incredible responsibility. Have there been things that set you up, and just to share? We're studying the book of the character of Joshua. Good guy, faithful guy, had integrity, and then something Moses saw in him, like, man, I'm choosing you. And has there been similar experiences in your guys' lives?
For sure.
Absolutely.
All right, Felicia and Jonathan.
Yeah, several. I remember when I was studying at Andrews, this was my first year doing my master's, and I was in a writing class. And at the end of that in the middle of that writing class, my professor was like, because there was a student magazine that used to be published. And she said, I really think that you can take care of the editing. And I was like, there is no way that I could do this. Like, somehow she saw something in me that I could not have seen in myself. And that opened a whole bunch of doors. But in my undergraduate years at NCU, Northern Caribbean University in Jamaica, this was freshman year, someone who worked at the radio and television station there said, I think you could do radio. I think you could do television, actually, was the first. And I was like, I don't know. I never would have imagined that. And that opened the door. And now years later, on Inverse. So the ability, ability for people to to see certain things in you that you cannot see for yourself. 2 years ago, at the time of this recording, I was attending a women's retreat, and there were some things that I was doing and saying. And this group of old ladies, they came around me. They said, "You should be the women's ministry director for our conference." And I laughed at them. Like I laughed because it seemed so impossible. And then months later, I was in that position. And so God really has a way of training the eye of certain people to see things that visibly, humanly speaking, you cannot see it. And so it has to be the Holy Spirit. And then to have the heart of Joshua to walk in that and to have that trust. So those were a few things that popped up in
So the group of Mosesinas who called out the Joshua in you. Yeah.
Is there a female version of Moses?
In the Bible?
He just made that up.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just wondering.
Oh, the name?
Yeah. Anyways, look it up.
Okay.
Yeah, so... But to answer your question as well, I would say there were two things that stick out to me. One was I was in 9th grade or so, and my brother, who had just converted, to full commitment to Jesus, and I wouldn't say I was fully converted. I was like, I believe, but it was, whatever in between. And he said, "Hey, I'm going on this mission trip, and you should come with me." And I'm like, "What is a mission trip?" And so, but I did. And he said, you just tell children's stories. I preach, you tell children's stories. Like, okay. And then on this mission trip, someone asked me to go and preach a sermon. And I'm like, I've never, I don't know how to do this. And then I remember there was a pastor on our trip, and I was like, "Hey, can you give me a sermon? I don't know how to do this." And he gave me something, and it was terrible. I was like, "What is this? I don't know how to preach this." So literally we were driven to the place to preach, my friend and I, and we had nothing to preach, and we walked up there, and this was the first time I had to really, really pray, because I didn't know what I was doing, but there was no way out. And I prayed, and I will never forget how the Holy Spirit literally inspired my thoughts. I had a translator, so he would give me the thought, I would say it, the translator would, and I didn't know what was come next. The translator would say it, and then the thought came, next thought came, and I preached the whole sermon. And I would have never seen myself do anything like this. And so God set me up to become a preacher and to speak. And that kind of opened that door, even though I wasn't even fully converted. It definitely pushed me towards that direction. And then the second thing was being involved with media. It was for a fall break. I was just going to go home, and just randomly, I ran into this guy who was part of a youth conference thing. And he said, "Hey, you should do our live stream. Look, you should be a host on TV for us." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And long story short, I ended up doing that, which set me up to more and more media opportunities to be involved where I can share, in a Christian context. And so I guess that's one of the reasons.
Now you're an inverse. Yeah.
So it's funny how God sets it up. But it was people who somehow saw that in me, and they probably didn't know I wasn't really converted, but God used even that to bring me closer to Him and lead and guide my life.
For me, now I have the privilege now to be able to lead a program for public university students who are studying on public universities, and we run a center at Michigan State University. And a lot of what my work entails there is, we have to fundraise. In order to fundraise, you have to be able to pitch your program's idea and so forth and so on. And at times it can be a stressful job. For most of my years in high school, in order to make money to go to school, I had to sell books door to door, Christian books door to door. And I did that for, I don't know, maybe 9 years total. And I remember so many times as I was doing this work in the heat of the day, and you have, your success rate is very, very small. If you're selling at 10% of the houses, you're doing well, right? So you have such a horrible success rate. And I was all right at it. And so there were so many days as I was working through the summer, and you have to do it no matter what, rain, super hot, doesn't matter. Mosquitoes are out. You just have to do it over and over and over. And I remember so many times thinking, what in the world am I doing this for? I don't really even need the money. My parents are paying for my school, so it's I don't even know why I'm doing this. And I remember there were some times after these doors where you just put everything that you have trying to convince this person to buy these books, and you try to use God, like these books are going to help you get closer to God. They're going to help save your children. Finally, that doesn't work. Like pity, like just help me. I need money for school, right? That doesn't work. Just begging, like, look, I haven't had any sales. Like, could you please just give me $1? And you're just like, so you're crawling.
Desperate.
Yeah, you're desperate. And they say no.
Pitiful.
Yeah. And after all of that, they still say no. And you walk away and you're thinking like, man, God curse these people, bring fire down from heaven. And you're thinking like, why am I doing this? This is such dumb work. Why am I doing this? And now as I reflect this has happened, this was, decades ago. And now as I reflect on the work that I do now, I realize it is those.
You have the same feelings now.
Nothing has changed. I realize, you know what? Nothing has changed. I realize that those moments during my summer have done more to prepare me for the work that I do now than all my schooling, than anything else.
Yeah.
And it allowed me to reinvent myself it gives you the opportunity to reinvent yourself at every single door. Like I started thinking about all the benefits of what I learned from that.
Yeah.
And I realized, man, God was using this without me even knowing to prepare me for things that I never thought were in my future.
Yeah. Yeah. If I can just jump into this too. I remember I worked at a bagel shop and I was the cleaner in high school, right? I'm very antisocial, introverted. I just wanted to clean because I like cleaning. And then I would work on Sundays for 12 hours. And I remember that we would have like 50 to like 100 people out on Sunday morning for brunch. And it got super, super, super busy. So I'm in the back, I'm just cleaning. I'm a cleaner. I don't do anything else. I'm just washing dishes, cleaning. And our boss said, Justin, get out there. And I'm like, what do I mean? I don't talk. I'm now on Inverse, and now we have all this whatever they're going. I don't talk to people, man. I'm just, you got to get out there. And I remember this, I went out there, I'm just so nervous. My hands are shaking. And this is just one-on-one. This is not to a mass audience. And it was like, hey, I want an onion bagel with cream cheese on it. And I remember getting a bagel and putting cheese and an onion in it and then packaging it and giving it to him. And then he came back 30 minutes later and he was like screaming at my boss and saying like, who eats a bagel with an onion and a cheese in it anyway? I asked for an onion bagel with cream cheese. Like, is that so difficult for a bagel shop? And I'm just like mortified. The boss could have easily dismissed me. But he's like, hey, I want you to go out there and do it again and try. And I remember like just getting into it. And I remember at one point after working there like 3 or 4 summers that I would just like shout out to the masses. I'm like, all right, hey, if you're going to get bagels, go to your left, but if you're going to right. And I remember like organizing people. Because I hate chaos. And I remember getting bagels ready and be like, hot salt bagels. I'm like, it was like those years, I clearly felt that God was using my oratory skills for communication. And later on at GYC or some of these conventions, I'm like ordering people around during meal services. But that was really the beginning of communication for me. Like and even when I failed, it was a boss saying, hey, it's okay. Yeah. You're a kid. It's okay, but do it again. And that guy was a Moses for me. We all have these experiences. We all need it. And if you're an older person out there, find the Joshuas, give them grace, give them more opportunities. And if you're a Joshua out there, find your Moseses, find your Mosesinas, and gravitate towards them and say, hey, I need mentoring in my life. We all need this, and we encourage you. Let's follow the footsteps of Joshua, who was in the footsteps of Jesus. See you next week here in Inverse.